Deep in the woods of rural Maine, the FBI is making their way down a remote gravel road. Their destination is the home at the end of this road, tucked away from the public. This white house almost looks abandoned with the overgrown grass and boarded up windows, but it's using 5 times the amount of electricity that a normal house in the area uses. What could be going on inside?
Federal law enforcement officials continue to investigate and shut down illegal Chinese marijuana grow operations across Maine.
Chinese mafia, I think, is a better term and an easier way to understand it.
Inside this home were Chinese nationals shipped to Maine to grow massive amounts of marijuana. Every room in this house was transformed into a greenhouse with big bright lights and irrigation hoses. The workers would all sleep in one room, were paid $1,000 a month to work 24/7, and were rarely ever allowed to leave the home. These homes were also very dangerous to live in. There was constantly exposed electrical wiring, illegally upgraded power systems that could handle the massive amount of electricity needed, and a high risk of mold, fire, and even carbon monoxide poisoning. At first, you might think these were just some crazy people trying to do anything to make a quick buck, but this home was actually just one of 270 homes across Maine that were tied to the Chinese Communist Party, all housing illegal marijuana grows. And then if we zoom out even more, New York, Michigan, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Colorado, and California have all been linked to these illegal marijuana grows funded by the Chinese Communist Party. But this isn't just about profiting off weed. The Chinese Communist Party has a much bigger goal in mind, extending their influence deep into rural America and using this drug to spy on unsuspecting Americans.
Sounds like you're saying this is bigger than marijuana.
I think it is bigger than marijuana.
In September of 2020, Maine began issuing their first licenses for legal marijuana cultivation and retail sales. This is essentially when marijuana first became legal in the state. The Chinese Communist Party saw this as a massive opportunity and started sending citizens of theirs into Maine. The new legalization of cannabis, as well as the high demand for it in the Northeast, were the perfect conditions for a black market to thrive. It only took 2 years before the black market became so big that Maine Senator Susan Collins began receiving complaints from her constituents.
Why is China sending its citizens, sneaking them into the country to open illegal marijuana operations in rural Maine communities?
One of the first places Chinese nationals were busted growing marijuana was in Franklin County, Maine in August of 2023. Neighbors would report that the smell of these cannabis plants were so strong that it would seep out of the house and could be smelled all across the neighborhood. The Franklin County Police Department monitored the house for several months before they finally got a warrant to do a lawful search. What they found when they entered the home was a completely gutted and redesigned house where every room was packed from floor to ceiling with marijuana plants. The electrical box at the side of the house had been illegally upgraded to handle the enormous power load that was needed to shine light on these plants. In one very small bedroom, investigators found 2 Chinese nationals living in extremely cramped conditions. They were sleeping on a bare mattress next to their suitcase, living like prisoners in the home that they were forced to cultivate. The neighbors would also often see unmarked U-Haul trucks pulling up to the home in the middle of the night. The U-Haul truck would be parked at the home for about an hour or two, and then it would mysteriously leave. These vehicles were allegedly used to transport the large quantities of harvested marijuana out of the state, bypassing usual highway checkpoints and blending in with all the other cars. These U-Hauls transporting marijuana out of Maine typically make their way to a secret stash house or warehouse in a suburban area. Here, the product is broken down, repackaged, and prepared for its final distribution. From there, most of the product then gets sent to Boston and New York City. In New York City, for example, the marijuana is funneled into the thousands of unlicensed cannabis dispensaries that have been exploding across the city. These shops sell to the public at prices that are much lower than the legal regulated dispensaries. The product is also sold to different criminal groups, including street dealers, who sell to individuals on the black market. The buyers are often the consumers who are looking for cheaper products to avoid high taxes and the prices of the legal market.
Unlicensed weed shops popping up all over the city.
But if these stores aren't licensed to do business, it begs the question, where are they getting their supply from?
Most individual marijuana buyers in New York City and other major cities don't realize it, but the money they're spending on marijuana is often making its way all the way back to the Chinese Communist Party. The money these illegal grow houses make, like the ones in Maine for example, have to be sent back to China in discreet ways, however. It would be too easy to track if the money was being sent directly to the Chinese Communist Party, so instead, these grow houses transfer the US cash through a middleman. Essentially how it works is the grow houses transfer their profits to a wealthy Chinese citizen living in China, who then transfers the money to the Chinese Communist Party. This line of transfer then goes in reverse, where the Chinese Communist Party pays the wealthy Chinese citizen, who then sends a very small portion of the money to the actual operators of the marijuana grow houses in the United States. The Chinese Communist Party loves this operation because it brings foreign capital and valuable currency back into their country without having to go through official channels. And the scary part is, this is happening all across the United States.
And now to yet another illegal grow bust in Oklahoma, and this time agents seized tens of thousands of plants.
In the quiet town of Wetumpka, Oklahoma, there was a massive farm that had a legal license for growing medical marijuana. But this license was actually just a cover for a serious crime. This farm was run by two men from China named Jeff Wang and his cousin Tong Lin. Oklahoma's commercial marijuana license doesn't have a limit on how many marijuana plants you can have on your farm. This makes the state optimal for large-scale operations, and Jeff and Tong took advantage of this rule. At any given time, Jeff and Tong would have roughly 20,000 marijuana plants on their property, a number far higher than what would be needed for medical usage. Once these plants were ready to be harvested, Jeff and Tong would call up their delivery drivers. They had people who drove vans that looked like delivery trucks, often imitating the look of an Amazon delivery van. These drivers would arrive at the farm and load their vans with massive loads of marijuana, often around 150 to 200 pounds at a time. The drivers would then take all that marijuana to a secret warehouse in Oklahoma City. This warehouse wasn't hidden though. It was operated out of a normal business called Arch Granite and Cabinetry, which wouldn't normally raise any suspicion. There would be around 2,000 pounds of marijuana at this cabinet store at any given time. From there, the drivers would then load this marijuana onto large semi-trucks. These trucks would ship the marijuana thousands of miles away to the East Coast to sell on the black market. One driver alone reportedly shipped 56,000 pounds of marijuana in just a few months. But this operation couldn't last forever. In May of 2023, the police, along with federal agents, raided the farm. They found 20,000 marijuana plants growing in greenhouses, as well as over $100,000 in cash, which was hidden in the attic of the house. Jeff and Tong were found guilty of drug conspiracy and were sentenced to 10 years in prison. But who exactly was Jeff and Tong? They definitely weren't just your average drug dealers. They were high-level operators in a much larger, more terrifying criminal network. While they were there managing the operation, there were many more people there working for them who were not there by choice. The FBI and other authorities have found that the people actually tending to the plants are often victims of human trafficking and forced labor. They are lured from China with false promises of good jobs and a new life in America, but once they arrive, they are then held captive.
That means that there's a chance that the pot that you smoke, you vape, or you eat could have been grown by trafficking victims.
The conditions these workers endure are often shocking. They are crammed into small, dirty rooms, sometimes with dozens of people sharing a single bathroom, and they have no access to basic comforts like air conditioning. Their passports and identification are often confiscated, leaving them with no way to escape. The traffickers often threaten and abuse them, telling them they must work non-stop to pay off the huge debt they now owe for being smuggled into the country. A man named Jai Zhang was a victim of this human trafficking network. Zhang was a 57-year-old Chinese man who wanted to move to the United States to build a better life for his family. He found a job working at an illegal marijuana farm in Blackwell, Oklahoma, which was owned and operated by other Chinese immigrants. From the start, he told his relatives in New York that the job was absolutely brutal. He was forced to work up to 15 hours a day with no days off and the intense blast furnace heat of a plastic-covered greenhouse. After just 1 month on the job, Zhang became terribly ill with a high fever and struggled to breathe. He felt so sick that he decided he needed to leave the farm that very evening and go to New York for medical care. Unfortunately for Zhang though, he never made it to New York. Just an hour after sending a voice message to a cousin in Manhattan, asking her to buy him some oranges because he had no appetite, he was found unconscious and with no pulse. 3 people from the farm drove him to a nearby hospital, but they left in a hurry while the doctors were trying to revive him. His nephew, Weston Zhang, told reporters that the death of a healthy person after only 30 days of work doesn't make sense. The family believes the brutal working conditions led directly to his death, but the owners of the farm have not been charged in relation to the case. Jai Zhang and countless others are living like prisoners, treated as completely disposable by the network that brought them there. Now, obviously, one of the main reasons the Chinese Communist Party is doing this is to profit financially, but there's other incentives involved too. China often collaborates with a foreign partner in these illegal marijuana operations.
Over the last decade, Chinese and Mexican transnational criminal organizations have turned the legalization movement of marijuana into a multi-billion-dollar black market business.
Many of these Chinese nationals operating illegal marijuana grows in the United States have become the go-to money launderers for the Mexican cartels. Cartels generate massive amounts of cash from their drug sales in the United States, and they need a way of sending this cash back to Mexico. Because of strict currency controls and regulations in the United States, this is often hard to do through traditional banks. The Chinese networks then step in and offer a fast, efficient way of laundering money. The Chinese will take the cash from the cartels and use it for their own purposes, like buying up assets in the US, such as illegal marijuana farms. The Chinese then give the cartels the equivalent value in Mexican pesos. For the Mexican cartels, this system works perfectly in their favor, considering how dangerous and risky smuggling bulk cash is across the US-Mexican border. By using the Chinese networks, the cartels can avoid this risk completely, as the money is handled and laundered in the US and never physically leaves the country. And then as for the Chinese nationals living inside the US, this relationship allows them to expand their own criminal enterprises and launder money on a massive scale. Buying up US assets integrates the Chinese nationals further into the legitimate economy while remaining anonymous to law enforcement. But the Chinese buying US farmland could also be serving another purpose, much different than profiting off marijuana. Federal investigators and national security officials are now raising a much more alarming possibility. These farms may be strategic tools for spying on the United States. The Chinese nationals are often using fake names and buying land through fake businesses that are suspiciously close to sensitive US military bases. As of 2023, Chinese investors own 227,000 acres of US agricultural land. That's about 0.02 to 0.03% of all privately held US agricultural land, which is a pretty small fraction overall. By comparison, investors from Canada, the Netherlands, and Italy own millions of acres of land in the US, much larger than China. The concern isn't the total acreage, but it's where the land is located. In 2022, the Fufeng Group, which is a Chinese agribusiness, bought 370 acres of land in Grand Forks, North Dakota, to build a corn mill on. This corn mill was going to bring many jobs to Grand Forks, from the labor it takes to build the corn mill to the labor it takes to actually operate the mill. The problem with this mill, though, was its location. This 370-acre plot of land is only 12 miles from the Grand Forks Air Force Base, which contains sensitive drone and space equipment. Specifically, the Grand Forks Air Base is one of the main hubs that the United States is building their unmanned aerial systems at. Security experts worried that this new purchase of land by the Fufeng Group could be used to track the US military operations at Grand Forks. The Fufeng Group claims to be a private company, but their executives have strong ties to the Chinese political network, including the Chinese Communist Party. In January of 2023, the US Air Force formally weighed in. Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, Andrew Hunter, wrote that the Fufeng Group's project posed a significant threat to national security because of its proximity to the base. The Grand Forks City Council voted to terminate the development agreement, and by spring of 2023, the Fufeng Group's project was fully dead. For many Americans, this was the first time that they had heard about China buying US farmland. But this was far from the only case. In 2013, the largest meat processing group in China, formerly known as Shuanghe International, acquired Smithfield Foods in Virginia for $4.7 billion. Smithfield Food was a giant pork company that owned over 146,000 acres of farmland spread across several different states. This became the largest Chinese acquisition of a U.S. company ever. The acquisition also gave a Chinese-linked company control over a huge chunk of U.S. agricultural land and food supply. Critics then raised questions regarding whether Shuanghe International was truly a private company or if they were actually being influenced by the Chinese government, potentially giving Beijing control over a key U.S. resource, pork. This concern was intensified when it was found that Smithfield was regularly supplying pork products to U.S. military bases. Theoretically, China could be poisoning the pork supply that was being sent to U.S. soldiers. Not only that, but many feared the profits that came from this pork production would be sent to China rather than being reinvested into the American economy or circulated amongst U.S. farmers. At the time, though, in 2013, there was less political pressure between China and the US than there is today. The deal was ultimately allowed to go through, where the US ruled that there was no direct national security threat. After this acquisition, a lot of Smithfield pork production began shifting towards exporting to China, helping Beijing meet its pork demand during shortages. Today, Smithfield is the largest pork producer in the world, processing about 27 million pigs annually. And the company is still Chinese-owned. They own over 146,000 acres across the US, but mainly in the states of Missouri, North Carolina, and Virginia. So what began as a story about a simple drug bust has unraveled into a terrifying puzzle of human trafficking, global money laundering, and a quiet but growing threat to our national security. It's a reminder that in today's world, a bag of marijuana purchased on a city street could be part of a much larger and much more dangerous criminal enterprise that reaches all the way back to a foreign government. China's not the only one making moves in this new Cold War, though. The United States is now reopening World War II military bases in the Pacific, and the reason why may shock you.